Welcome to Reform Thinking.
Yes, welcome.
We have a massive stack of notes ready for you today.
We really do.
And we are thrilled you are joining us in the room. We are doing a deep dive into the source material, covering a specific, totally fascinating window of history.
It is an incredible period to look at. We are looking at the Hellenistic era.
Right.
That is the chunk of time spanning from 323 BC down to 31 BC.
And our mission today is to look at this period by synthesizing a historical analysis of the Greek-shaped cosmopolitan world with a very specific theological framework.
Yes.
We are viewing this era not as random, chaotic history, but as the sovereign preparation for the coming of Christ.
Precisely. If we pull back and look at the bigger picture, we're establishing a specific framework for you right out of the gate.
Yeah.
We are observing this historical shift not as an accident of human ambition, but as the meticulous outworking of God's decree.
And this aligns perfectly with the Westminster Confession of Faith.
It does. Chapter 5 of the Confession affirms that God's providence extends over all his creatures and all their actions.
Directing them to his own glory.
Spot on. While secular historians look at Alexander the Great's sweeping conquests across the Mediterranean and the ancient Near East as a triumph of military genius, which it was,
Right. Good.
the reformed eye perceives something else entirely. We see the shaggy goat described in Daniel chapter 8, verse 21.
Executing a divine mandate.
Yes. God used a massive pagan empire to unify the world culturally and linguistically, setting the stage for the New Testament.
You know, I have always found it wild that Alexander the Great thought he was just building his own legacy.
Oh, absolutely.
Just carving his name into the earth. But he was actually just paving the roads for the Apostle Paul's missionary trips centuries later.
It completely flips how you read secular history.
It really does. And that brings up a specific phrase from the Apostle Paul himself in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4.
The fullness of time.
The fullness of time. Paul says that when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. So you have to ask, how does a sovereign God prepare a fractured, scattered, tribal world for the incarnation of his Son?
He does it by establishing a common culture.
Right, and we see Alexander acting as a massive catalyst here. When he marched out of Macedonia and crushed the Persian Empire, he completely shifted the cultural center of gravity.
He planted nodes of Greek-speaking life all across the Mediterranean and the Near East.
And what is striking to me is the overlap between royal authority and urban life.
Yes, that is a huge factor.
Kings funded cities to legitimize their rule,
Right.
while cities adopted Greek forms to gain prestige. We are talking about the construction of agoras, theaters, and massive public councils in places that had never seen them before.
I mean, the sheer scale of the change is staggering. Prior to Alexander's campaign, the classical Greek world was anchored by the polis.
It's a small, independent city-state.
Right. Think of Athens, Sparta, or Corinth. That polis was the absolute center of a person's identity.
Their politics, their worship.
Yes. Your entire universe was confined to the walls of your city and the immediate farmland around it.
But following Alexander's conquests and his sudden death at age 32,
The stage was set for a new kind of international society. The older political map was completely erased
wiped clean.
and replaced with vast, interconnected monarchies ruling multi-ethnic populations. Alexander's generals, known as the Diadochi, fought over his empire and carved out major kingdoms.
You had the Ptolemaic kingdom down in Egypt,
Yes.
the Seleucid realm stretching across Syria and all the way into Mesopotamia.
And the Antigonid base back in Macedon and Greece.
Right. These successor regimes needed a workable way to govern incredibly diverse peoples.
They needed to raise revenue and secure their borders. Greek language and Greek institutional patterns filled that administrative need perfectly.
So put yourself in the sandals of the average person living through this transition.
It would be wild.
Imagine going from a highly localized, tribe-based identity to suddenly functioning within a massive interconnected empire.
The Greeks called this the oikoumene, the inhabited world.
That would cause immense disorientation for you. You used to know everyone in your valley.
And your local gods protected your specific river.
Yeah. Now, you are told you are part of a global system stretching to the borders of India.
But at the same time, it created an unprecedented level of interconnectedness.
We see a constant, massive movement of people. You have retiring Greek soldiers moving into new military colonies in Syria,
Bureaucrats taking up administrative posts in Egypt.
craftsmen and merchants chasing new opportunities across the sea. This constant movement made Greek culture incredibly contagious.
It spread everywhere.
Let's make this concrete for the listener. Imagine a grain merchant named Demetrios.
Okay, let's look at Demetrios.
Before Alexander, trading grain from Egypt to Syria would involve a nightmare of different languages
Different currencies.
and totally different tribal laws. It was a massive headache.
It was more than a headache. It was often an insurmountable barrier to large-scale commerce. But let us follow your example of Demetrios the merchant. In this new Hellenistic world, the contagion of Greek culture was fueled by massive economic incentives. These large kingdoms stabilized long-distance trade routes.
Right, they stamped out a lot of the local piracy and banditry.
Because the kings needed safe roads to move their own armies and tax revenues. Furthermore, they standardized the use of coinage.
Ah, the adequate standard.
Yes. Using the silver drachma, it became the dollar of the ancient world.
So Demetrios could load his grain in Alexandria, Egypt,
Right.
sail to Antioch in Syria,
Yes.
and sell it using the very same currency, signing a contract written in the very same legal language.
Well, precisely. Ports and caravan cities became bustling, cosmopolitan meeting places.
So if a local Syrian or Egyptian merchant wanted to succeed in business and compete with someone like Demetrios,
They had to learn the shared public framework.
Greek was already associated with the conquering elite, so it naturally became the standard for commerce.
Local families who wanted influence in the new administration or who wanted a seat on the new city councils often adopted Greek names
They pursued Greek schooling for their sons.
and participated in public civic life.
It is brilliant from an administrative standpoint. A monarch could present himself as the protector of high civilization,
Funding a massive new library or gymnasium.
and cities would reflect that royal prestige through their architecture and institutions. But an interconnected world of that scale absolutely needs a common operating system to function smoothly,
You cannot run a global empire if you cannot talk to the locals.
which shifts our discussion directly into the role of language, specifically the rise of Koine Greek.
Yes.
Koine just means common. This was not the highbrow, poetic language of Homer.
No, or the dense philosophical dialect of Plato.
Right. This was street Greek, marketplace Greek. It became the shared language of bureaucracy, military logistics, and interregional trade.
And here is the kicker for our theology.
Yeah.
It is the precise language the human authors of the New Testament utilized to state the gospel clearly across ethnic boundaries centuries later.
We can confidently describe the emergence of Koine Greek as a linguistic miracle.
It was sovereignly ordained by God to act as the precise vessel for the New Testament revelation.
The transition from the localized, often archaic dialects of classical Greek to this universal common tongue was the direct outworking of divine providence.
God chose to deliver the finality of his word in a language that combined the intellectual precision of the philosophers with the rugged accessibility of the marketplace.
And when we examine the linguistic architecture of Koine Greek, we see an inflected language.
This is a crucial concept to grasp. In English, word order dictates meaning.
Right. If I say, the dog bit the man, the subject comes first.
Yes, and if you flip it to the man bit the dog, the meaning completely changes. Word order is everything.
But in an inflected language like Koine Greek, the form of the word itself, specifically its ending, dictates its function in the sentence.
Hold on, before we move past that, let's break that down even further for anyone who might be rusty on their grammar.
Give me a real-world example of how that changes how we read a sentence in the New Testament compared to English.
Certainly, because the ending of the Greek noun tells you if it is the subject doing the action or the object receiving the action, the writer does not have to rely on word order.
Oh, I see.
This allowed the human authors of the New Testament to utilize syntax to focus on the central idea of the text with surgical precision.
So if the Apostle Paul wants to place a massive spotlight on a specific theological concept,
He can pull that word to the very front of the sentence, regardless of whether it is the subject or the object.
he can rearrange the words for maximum impact without changing the literal meaning of the sentence.
This gave the writers of the New Testament a highly flexible, incredibly precise tool to articulate complex spiritual truths.
That flexibility is amazing. But what I find even more fascinating for you as a listener is the theological weight carried by the verb tenses in this language.
Yes, the verb tenses are incredible.
We have the aorist tense and we have the perfect tense. When I first started studying this, it felt like doing math with words.
It can feel that way.
But the payoff is incredible.
Mm.
How does this specific grammar connect to our theology today, specifically our Reformed theology?
It connects directly to the Reformed doctrine of justification by faith alone.
Okay, let's look at that.
The verbal aspect of Koine Greek is uniquely suited to articulating the doctrines of grace. When the Holy Spirit inspired the writers to use these specific verb tenses, he was speaking in highly defined terms.
So let us look at the aorist and perfect tenses.
The aorist tense generally indicates a point-in-time action, a snapshot of an event that occurred.
Right.
The perfect tense, however, is even more specific. It indicates a completed action in the past that has continuing, ongoing results in the present.
Let me jump in here with an analogy that helped me grasp this.
Go ahead.
Think of the perfect tense like getting a tattoo.
I like that.
The action of getting the tattoo happened at a specific point in the past. You sat in the chair, the needle did its work, and it was finished.
Yes.
But the result, the ink on your arm, is a present, ongoing reality that you carry with you every single day.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
That is how Koine Greek describes our justification. Christ did the work on the cross in the past, but the status of being declared righteous is permanently stamped on us right now.
You do not have to keep getting re-tattooed every time you mess up.
No, you don't. The perfect tense provides an immovable foundation for justification because it depicts actions that are definitively accomplished.
Rather than ongoing processes dependent on human effort. When Jesus cries out, "It is finished," on the cross, the Greek text uses the perfect tense.
It's telestai.
Tetelestai. It has been accomplished and it remains accomplished forever.
These specific verb forms guard against novel interpretations and legalism.
They shut down any theological attempt to make justification a cooperative, ongoing effort between God and man.
The Greek grammar simply does not allow for a theology where you can lose your salvation and have to earn it back.
The linguistic rules themselves protect the purity of the gospel.
And another massive piece of this linguistic puzzle is the Septuagint.
Often referred to by the Roman numerals LXX.
Right. This was the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. It was formed in Alexandria, Egypt, during the 3rd century BC.
The story behind this is fascinating.
You have the Ptolemaic kings in Egypt obsessed with building the greatest library in the world in Alexandria.
They wanted a copy of every book ever written.
And they realized they had a massive population of Jewish people living in their city who had this ancient, revered text, the Torah.
So the king commissions 72 Jewish scholars to translate the Hebrew Bible into Koine Greek.
What is mind-blowing to me is that this project forged a robust theological vocabulary centuries before the apostles even wrote the epistles.
Yes. Words like hilasterion for propitiation
Charis for grace.
and dikaiosine for righteousness.
These were heavily seasoned in the Greek translation of the Law and the Prophets long before they appeared in the New Testament.
That vocabulary is a staggering demonstration of God bounding history to his will.
This translation work was basically the ultimate bridge in redemptive history.
When the Jewish people were dispersed and began speaking Greek as their primary language, they needed the scriptures in their new tongue.
The Septuagint ensured that when the apostles later preached Christ crucified to a Greek-speaking world, they were using words that already carried the weight of centuries of covenantal context.
We can contrast this with extra-biblical Greco-Roman usage. Take the Greek word euangelion, which translates to gospel.
In the secular Hellenistic world, this word was used to announce a massive military victory.
Or the birth of a royal heir to the Caesar.
It was an imperial announcement.
By sovereign design, God hijacked this specific term. He appropriated it so the world would understand Christ's victory over sin and death not as a private religious feeling,
but as the ultimate public good news of a conquering king. Okay, so let's play out a hypothetical scenario here.
Right.
What if the New Testament had been written in a highly localized, archaic dialect? What if it was written in a language only spoken by a few thousand people in the hills of Judea?
The rapid transnational spread of early Christianity would have faced massive translation hurdles.
Every time a missionary crossed a border, they would have to spend years learning a new language just to explain the basics.
God's providence ensured the vessel, this universal language of Koine Greek, was completely ready and functioning across the entire Mediterranean before the message was even delivered.
A shared tongue was indispensable for communication across ethnic boundary.
It was. But here's the contrast.
Right.
While the Greeks had a brilliant, highly precise language, their spiritual and philosophical lives were totally bankrupt.
We see this outward brilliance masking an inner emptiness. When you look at the Hellenistic world, on the surface it looks brilliant, Beautiful marble columns, massive libraries, incredible art.
But underneath, total spiritual exhaustion, the old gods just were not cutting it anymore.
Let's pivot and look into the educational facade and the massive philosophical void of the era.
The Hellenistic world was gripped by a severe spiritual darkness. The traditional Olympian gods, Zeus, Hera, Apollo, had failed to satisfy the human soul.
They were viewed more as civic mascots than beings worthy of genuine reverence.
What replaced true worship was the Greek ideal of paideia. This concept refers to elite formation through rigorous education.
Education in the Hellenistic world was not just about acquiring facts.
No, it was the making of a certain kind of person. They wanted to produce someone who could read Homer well,
Speak persuasively in the public assembly.
and steer through complex civic expectations.
The gymnasium embodied this ideal in concrete form.
I think we need to clarify what the gymnasium actually was, because today, when we say gym, we think of a room with some treadmills and free weights.
Right, where you put your headphones on and ignore everyone.
Yes. The ancient Greek gymnasium was entirely different. It was essentially the ancient equivalent of an Ivy League fraternity mixed with an exclusive country club.
If you weren't in, you were nobody.
It was a primary social networking hub where young elite men were trained physically, yes, but also where business networks were formed.
Civic identity was reinforced.
And philosophical lectures were given. You exercised naked, you rubbed yourself down with olive oil, and you debated the finer points of poetry.
It was a total cultural immersion. Yet despite all this outward intellectual brilliance and physical perfection, there was an intense philosophical void.
This perfectly illustrates the concept of total depravity referenced by the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1.
Paul writes that people possessed a highly developed intellect, and they could observe the invisible attributes of God in creation.
But they actively suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. Because the Olympian gods were morally bankrupt and philosophically empty, we see the rapid rise of new philosophical schools trying desperately to fill the gap.
These schools tried to answer the fundamental human question: how do we achieve peace in a chaotic world?
Let us look at Epicureanism first.
People today hear the word Epicurean and they think of a foodie, someone who likes really expensive cheese and fine wine.
But the ancient philosophy was much darker and more comprehensive than that.
Right.
Epicureanism was fundamentally materialist. They believed the universe was nothing but atoms colliding in the void.
They taught that the gods, if they existed at all, lived in a state of distant bliss and were entirely indifferent to human affairs.
Therefore, they argued, humans should not fear divine judgment. Their highest aim in life was ataraxia,
which translates to freedom from mental distress and physical pain.
They sought this through a refined pursuit of pleasure and the active avoidance of public life and social responsibility.
When we analyze this through a modern lens, Epicureanism is the direct ancestor of modern secular humanism and the prosperity gospel.
It treats the divine merely well, just as a concept to be ignored.
Or as a means to a comfortable, pain-free life, completely ignoring the reality of human rebellion against a holy God and the desperate need for a mediator.
Then, on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have Stoicism.
If the Epicureans wanted to hide from the world's pain, the Stoics wanted to grit their teeth and endure it.
This was a philosophy of pantheistic fatalism. The Stoics believed that a divine spark, a logos, or universal reason permeated all things.
They believed everything that happened was strictly fated, so getting upset about a tragedy was entirely irrational.
They sought peace through intense self-discipline, suppressing their passions and maintaining absolute emotional detachment.
Stoicism was a philosophy of extreme moralism and self-reliance. It is strikingly similar to modern spiritual but not religious trends.
And the intense bootstrap theology often found in highly legalistic circles today.
The Stoic believed he could achieve virtue solely through his own willpower.
Both Epicureanism and Stoicism completely failed to offer true hope because they lacked a true mediator.
They had no real answer for the objective guilt of sin or the terrifying reality of death.
As we contrast these philosophies with the Westminster Confession of Faith, particularly chapters 3 and 5 regarding God's decree and providence, we highlight a massive distinction.
Christian comfort does not rely on human self-mastery or the avoidance of pain.
True comfort relies on the sovereign, loving care of a heavenly Father who orchestrates all things for the good of those who love him.
The Stoic submits to a cold, unfeeling fate.
The Christian submits to a personal, loving God.
That is a brilliant distinction. Now, during this same era of political instability, we also see the massive allure of mystery cults.
Because the public philosophies were so cold and intellectual, the common people turned to the underground.
Groups like the Cult of Isis or the Eleusinian Mysteries offered secret initiations, strange rituals, and intense mystical experiences.
They promised some hidden emotional union with the divine.
It is so easy to relate this to modern trends, where people seek highly subjective mystical experiences or base their reality on their internal feelings rather than resting on objective historical truth.
Picture the Apostle Paul on Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17.
He is walking into Athens, a society absolutely obsessed with finding some new thing.
Debating these exact philosophies.
Yes, the Epicureans and the Stoics are specifically mentioned in the text.
Yet, despite all their learning, they had an altar dedicated to the unknown God. They were entirely lacking a true mediator for their sin.
Paul's confrontation on Mars Hill brilliantly exposes the idols of the Hellenistic mind. The culture claimed that truth was a subjective pursuit, a secret mystical feeling, or a cold philosophical construct.
But Paul stood in the shadow of the Parthenon and announced that truth is a person, Jesus Christ, who acted in real space and time and proved his authority by rising from the dead.
To counter the subjective mysticism of the Hellenistic era and the similar mystical trends of our own day, the Reformed tradition highlights the objective means of grace.
The Word, sacraments, and prayer are the objective, tangible ways God communicates his life to his people.
We do not look inward for a hidden spark of the divine.
We look outward to the Christ revealed in the Scriptures.
Okay, so we have this massive philosophical exhaustion setting the perfect stage for a savior. The Greeks have the roads, they have the language, but their souls are empty.
But this brings up a massive question for you to ponder.
We know God had a chosen people, the Jews. How did they survive this overwhelming cultural pressure?
The Hellenistic Sea was swallowing up local identities everywhere.
Egyptians were acting like Greeks. Syrians were acting like Greeks. Let's look at the crucible of Judea and how they were preserved in a pagan sea.
There was a reality of intense cultural bargaining taking place across the map.
The spread of Hellenistic culture always involved negotiation. Local populations frequently adopted Greek for public functions.
They used it in the marketplace.
Right.
And the courts.
Yes, and the local administration, while keeping their native languages and customs active at home behind closed doors.
A Syrian man could bear a Greek name in public documents, wear Greek clothing to the civic festivals, and still observe his ancestral rites privately.
For the Jews scattered throughout the Hellenistic world, this dynamic was incredibly intense.
However, we must view the Jewish diaspora, the scattering of the Jewish people outside of Palestine, not as a tragedy of displacement, but as a providential dispersion.
God meticulously preserved the ethnic and national identity of his people during the silent intertestamental period, the roughly 400 years between Malachi and Matthew.
He maintained the covenantal context despite the total absence of a prophetic voice.
But those Greek civic norms we talked about, like the gymnasium, they were not culturally neutral, were they?
No, not at all. Participating in the civic assembly carried heavy pressures to conform to pagan honor codes and worship.
It wasn't just about learning a new vocabulary to trade wheat. It was an entire lifestyle package. If a young Jewish man wanted to advance in society, he had to join the gymnasium.
And that meant dedicating his athletic pursuits to a pagan god.
That is a critical point. The Greek civic institutions represented a full social world, permeated with polytheism.
Participation brought wealth and prestige, but it also heavily pressured families to compromise their covenant with Yahweh to conform to Greek ideals of status.
For many pagan communities, these were manageable accommodations. They simply added a few Greek gods to their existing pantheon.
But for Judea, covenant identity sharpened the boundaries. Yahweh is a jealous God.
Greek cultural adaptation was tolerated when it was simply a public tool, like speaking the language for commerce.
But it became a severe flashpoint when it demanded the alteration of covenant identity.
You could not abandon circumcision.
You could not violate Sabbath observance.
And you could not compromise temple-centered worship without cutting yourself off from the people of God.
Which leads us directly to one of the most dramatic events in ancient history, the Maccabean Revolt, taking place between 167 and 160 BC.
This was a massive, violent reaction to the Seleucid ruler Antiochus V Epiphanes. This king was an absolute megalomaniac.
Epiphanes literally means God manifest. He tried to force Greek civic and religious expectations directly onto Torah
He
practices.
didn't just ask the Jews to assimilate, he tried to violently eradicate their religion.
The Maccabean revolt perfectly illustrates the fault line of Hellenization. Antiochus V Epiphanes attempted to impose what the scriptures call the abomination of desolation.
He marched into Jerusalem, entered the Holy of Holies, and commanded that a pig be sacrificed on the altar to Zeus.
He outlawed circumcision under penalty of death and burned copies of the Torah.
Yet in this intense, fiery crucible, God cultivated a remnant who refused to bow to the idols of Hellenism.
A priest named Mattathias and his sons, notably Judas Maccabeus, launched a fierce guerrilla war against the Seleucid Empire.
They fought from the hills, reclaiming the temple and purifying it, an event still celebrated today as Hanukkah.
They maintained the purity of the law and the promise. This history highlights the Israel Church distinction within Reformed theology, showing God's sovereign preservation of the physical messianic line.
He ensured the preservation of his people amidst the crushing pressure of total cultural assimilation.
If Antiochus had succeeded, the Jewish identity would have been erased, and the prophecies concerning the Messiah's lineage would have failed.
And out of this dispersion, we see the strategic genius of the synagogue system.
Because the Jews were scattered across the empire but remained fiercely tethered to the law, synagogues sprang up everywhere.
A synagogue basically just required 10 Jewish men to form a quorum. They became these decentralized outposts across the known world.
They gathered on the Sabbath, read from the scrolls, and prayed.
They became the absolute perfect launch pads for the early church.
The synagogue was an institution of sheer providential brilliance. When the Apostle Paul rolled into a new city, whether it was in Asia Minor or Greece, he did not have to rent a lecture hall and start from scratch.
You went straight to the local synagogue.
This became the place where the Septuagint, that Greek translation of the Old Testament we discussed earlier, was read publicly.
This provided a Greek-speaking audience, which often included God-fearing Gentiles hanging around the periphery, with a deep-seated knowledge of the Old Testament.
This prepared the ground for the apostolic declaration that all the ancient prophets bear witness to Jesus of Nazareth.
We also see the vital role of Hellenistic Jews, individuals like Stephen and Philip mentioned in the book of Acts.
Their bilingual, bicultural reality positioned them perfectly to bridge the gap between their Hebrew roots and the broader Gentile world.
Without this specific class of people, crossing that massive cultural divide from a Judean sect to a global faith would have been incredibly slow.
God engineered the exact sociological conditions necessary for the rapid spread of the message of union with Christ.
We have gathered all these amazing historical threads today. The absolute precision of the Greek language, the spiritual exhaustion of the pagan philosophy,
The massive interconnected infrastructure of roads and trade.
and the miraculous preservation of Israel through figures like the Maccabees. But we have to ask you, the listener, the ultimate so what?
How does this ancient history apply to a modern Christian's daily life? We cannot leave this in the realm of historical or academic trivia.
The practical application for the believer is found in what Reformed theology calls the third use of the law.
This focuses on grateful obedience, grounded entirely in the finished work of the gospel.
We spend time contrasting the moralism of the Stoic, who sought a cold, detached virtue through intense self-reliance.
The Christian life is entirely different. Our obedience flows entirely from our vital union with Christ.
The law is no longer a heavy burden we carry to earn God's favor. It is a bright flashlight, showing the saved believer how to walk in gratitude.
Our strength for obedience does not come from Hellenistic self-mastery, but from the indwelling spirit of the risen Christ.
Furthermore, this history instructs us to actively reject modern pragmatism and liberal theology.
There's constant, subtle temptation today to Hellenize the gospel.
By that, I mean there is a push to remove its supernatural offense, the reality of sin, the necessity of the blood atonement, the physical resurrection.
To appease modern cultural elites, just as some ancient Jews compromised with the gymnasium.
We must stand firmly on the objective, inerrant Word of God, recognizing that human philosophy, no matter how eloquent, is sinking sand.
To summarize all of this for you, human history is never an accident. It is never just a sequence of random battles and political treaties.
The massive, complex Hellenistic world was the precise anvil upon which God forged the necessary tools to broadcast the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ to the nations.
He used the blind ambition of pagan empires to build the roads, stabilize the trade, and forge the language that would carry the greatest news in history.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider as we wrap up. The Hellenistic era used Roman roads and Koine Greek as its massive transmission system to spread ideas rapidly across borders.
Today, we live in a massive, hyper-connected digital landscape. Code and the internet act as our modern common language and our modern trade routes.
A kid with a smartphone in Tokyo can instantly communicate with someone in rural Brazil.
If God used the secular pagan empires of the ancient world to forge the fullness of time for the early church, how might he be using the sprawling, chaotic digital infrastructure of our current era to prepare the stage for the next massive movement of the gospel?
Something for you to chew on this week. Thank you for joining us in the room today on Reformed Thinking.
It has been a true pleasure to look into these massive historical truths with you today.